Hi guys, back. I know I promised I'd be getting back to the wire recorder also. I promise you I will. Probably on the next video after this one. But I wanted to show some things I've ran into and kind of let you know where I'm at. First thing is I've got these all taken apart and restuffed. There's your capacitors in here. These basically just have a metal plate that is soldered on. You can't use your regular soldering iron. It just will not melt it good enough. You want to use one of the old style large pencil irons, like this, and you just kind of hold it up with a pair of pliers. I just put vice grips on here, and then you just start working your way around. These are filled with wax, so they'll start pushing out a lot of solder, but if you hold it to an angle, the solder will flow down, and you can flow it off onto something, onto your desk. If you don't care about your desk like I don't care about mine, it's so badly damaged. But you can also into something else. Anyway, once it gets down to a certain point, you pretty much got all the excess solder off. Then you can stick in here a pocket knife or something. I just used a X-Acto knife, stuck in here, opened it up a little bit, and then got a screwdriver in there, and it just pops up and off. What's inside them? This is what's in them, which is kind of nice because it actually has a date code of September 25th, 1932 on it. They all had date codes. Some of them, the other stampings of the part number and stuff was over top of the date code. This is the easiest one to read. So all these are done. There was 5 of them. This is the last of the IFs to be done. I had to replace the 2 capacitors. The other 2 that was in here were off by quite a little bit. They're supposed to be about 220 to 225 picofarad, and they were reading around 600, 630. So, of course, the wires need to be replaced. I still have these 2 left to do. Once this thing's all done, I'll take some hot glue just to kind of hold these back down in up against here. I've got this one pulled out because this is one of the wires that has to be replaced. One thing, it's got some insulation showing, or insulation breakdown here. I don't want to go this far into the coil, so what I'll probably do is just use some chronodope, liquid tape type stuff, and paint over that to seal that up, and then solder new wire up in here. Stay away from my heat down in here. This one here is fine, other than I'll probably cut off about here or here, solder my new wire on. Heat shrink this one down, probably use some more of that on there. As far as this stuff goes, this potting, it's soft. There's some here. It's real soft and breaks up pretty easy. You can just peel it off your fingernail or a knife or whatever. Just be, oh yeah, that was cute. Just be careful if you're using a knife. Here's your coil. There's no one up here. It's fairly thick on there, but you don't want to, while you're digging, you don't want to get down in here, even though it's got a pretty heavy gauge insulating material on it. You could still nick the coil. So the other 2 that had the resistors in them I've replaced what wires I needed to. This one here is a cloth, pure cloth covered wire, so I'm not going to replace it. These 2 were the only rubber ones that was bad, and this one. I did disconnect the coil from one end Again, I'll probably put some stuff on here, but just to isolate the resistor from the coil. Check the coil, check the resistor. These are 100K. This one was the highest at 106. The other one was 102. So that's within a good tolerance. They're supposed to be 20%. So the caps that were in here, what they look like. Here's one right here. So they just all pop right out pretty easy. The stuff is not hard. It is real soft, and you can easily pry it loose and stuff. Let's see. Oh, some other things. I ended up dismantling the tuning condenser. Not that I really needed to, but under normal circumstances, because it was pretty clean, you know, it just got a little bit of surface dirt that can be easily brushed off. But the reason was that I took it apart was, well, a little bit of history about, or a little bit about radios. Anybody that's worked on a lot of radios, you know, 30s and 40s, you will find that your tuning condenser is mounted on rubber. Where the bolts go through, there'll be rubber underneath here, underneath the different spots where she's bolted down, and a lot of times it's hard or even completely gone, and you have to replace those. A lot of times the chassis themselves will be mounted on rubber washers or something of that nature. The whole idea of that is the speaker itself, and a lot of those radios is mounted to the cabinet, and the vibration, especially like bass vibrations and low tone vibration, but even high frequency vibrations, can get into the tuning condenser and cause the plates to vibrate. Now, really the main one that is of concern more than anything is the oscillator plates. That section of the tuning condenser that is for the oscillator. But if it starts vibrating the plates, well, capacitance is one of the variables in capacitance, and adjusting capacitance is the distance separation of the plates. Well, if they're vibrating, they're getting closer and further away, back and forth, and that will affect the capacitance. And you change the capacitance, then your oscillator frequency starts floating and changing. Well, Atwater Kent on this radio had no rubber mounts here. No rubber mounts for the chassis. Well, there are feet. They're felt, so there's not a whole lot of rubber there. So nothing really isolating the tuning condenser from anything. So what they did instead is, just on this, they actually put rubber. They poured in some rubber on each side to insulate the plates. In other words, to stabilize them. Now, they wanted to use rubber because, well, for one thing, if it was anything else, it could actually start vibrating itself and cause the plates to vibrate. The other thing, too, is, you know, there are a certain amount of movement of the plates due to heat. You know, not a lot, but they do expand and contract, so you want something to allow that too. The problem was, of course, like the wire insulation, rubber insulation, it had hardened. Well, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have been concerned about that. I would just chipped it out and, you know, use probably silicone rubber back in there and called it good, and not tore the condenser apart. But the problem was, I got looking at it closer, is I have corrosion all through those plates that needs to be cleaned off, right where that rubber was. But it didn't only attack the aluminum, it attacked the nickel plating on the brackets that actually support these. You can see green kind of like corrosion in here and dark color. Well, that's the nickel and the copper below it as it ate away the nickel being corroded. It even attacked inside here. Don't know if you can see them too well, but the rivets in here are rusty in here. So I need to clean all that up, and the only way to really do it was to dismantle it. I'll get this all cleaned up, get that cleaned up inside the main frame, put her back together, get it all adjusted. It ought to be adjusted for space, you know, separation of the plates between the rotor and the stator, just like I did on that other tuning condenser. Once everything is adjusted and everything, then I'll take silicone rubber, good quality silicone rubber, those real silicone rubber, and just put it down in here so it makes contact and supports the plates, and down against here just the way they done it. I thought I had the old rubber that came out of here, but I had since cleaned the bench up, and I think I just swept it away. This thing is not hard to take apart. You got two bearing plates, one here and one here, that come loose. As far as the ground forks go, they're just like the other one that on the other Atwater Kent. I think it was the Atwater Kent I worked on, or no, the other radio. Anyway, these pop out. They're just hooked in here, and you just kind of lift up and pop them out of their holes, and then slide them out. Some notes of interest on this is there's no ball bearings on this. It's not like newer tuning condensers. Well, you up front here you have a series of ball bearings around that it fits into, and then the back you'll either have, generally a lot of times, just a pin that goes in there that's got a drilled out hemispherical hole in it, and same way inside here, and there's a ball there that acts as the bearing surface. This on the back side has a brass cone, and this is cut out same way, drilled out as a cone, reversed, and so that just sits in there, and then here's your adjustment that you adjust it for tension, and it also allows to keep the thing centered where it's supposed to be. But that's your bearing surface there. The front is even more interesting. Now it just looks like a regular piece of steel with a hole drilled into it, but it's more than that. Don't know if it can be seen on the camera, but you'll see a slightly different color in the metal, like a little ring there. Don't know if you can see it. I can actually barely make it out on the screen here, so I don't know if you can see that, but what that is the actual bearing surface. And if it'll focus in here, you'll see kind of like two different bright areas. One's raised above the rest of it, right in here. That's the bearing surface, and that's actually softer material than this. It's a different material. It's known as Babbitt, which is basically a lead. That what they did was, when they made this, they drilled the hole out, and then they machined out a groove inside there, and then they poured in molten lead inside that, and then remachined that so it would fit just perfectly with the proper clearance onto here. The lead is a nice soft bearing surface that's durable, and then of course just add some grease to it and you're good to go. and it's lasted this many years. So that's basically how that's your two bearings for it to operate it. Let's see what else. So far, pretty much all the resistors are good. Now, one other little thing was I had here's the choke. It's a center tap choke, so there's 3 wires. I was able to get down in here and keep the wires separated and solder on new wires, and then put heat shrink down inside over each individual wire and heat shrink them. And then I used some of this down inside after the heat shrink was on to any area that might still be non-insulated. That would cover that up. I put it in pretty good. And then I took another heavy, larger piece of heat shrink, went over all 3 wires, and then hot glued the rest of it so that we've got, you know, some strain relief there. The interstage audio transformers, which is actually 2, was a little different. And I don't know if I can get a good shot of this, but let me loosen some things up and turn you to the screen. I haven't printed off the schematic, and bear with me here. Zoom in. Primarily, let's center this one. This is the part that I wanted you to see. Okay. Give me a pointer here. There's 2 transformers. There's this one, and yeah, you can see that one. This one and this one that's inside the can that I potted in there. Well, this one's showing a 0.05 microfarad capacitor and a resistor. It's in this dotted line, so it's inside the can. And of course they give you black with red paint, black wire with red paint on it. That is one side of that resistor, and a red wire out here. This is supposed to be 0.25 megs or 250k resistor. When I checked it, it read like 1k. The capacitor, which I wasn't really sure of, but since it is isolated, I mean, once the thing's disconnected, I went ahead and checked it as far as leakage, and it was leaking at the lowest voltage. And it, instead of reading 0.05, it was reading like about 100 picofarads or so. So I thought, well, okay, these are inside that can, you know, probably at the top, you know, up here at the top or something. And no, they weren't. They were actually embedded inside this transformer itself, because that's the only place I could find them. The red wire came out, this black with red came out on one side, and then the other side had the brown and yellow wires. So they were inside that can, or inside that transformer, and I didn't feel like really trying to tear the transformer apart. So I disconnected the red wire from here. Of course I had to replace it anyway. And found a spot there that I could attach on to it with, and hot glue it in place to hold it, a capacitor inside a 0.05. And then all I had to do is attach to where the black connects on. As far as the resistor goes, I decided to just go ahead and leave it, that one in there, or not disconnect the black wire particularly. Leave it. I don't care about it. I will put the resistor on the outside. There are plenty of places when this radio is all complete that you'll never even see it. And that's what I'll do with that 250k resistor. I'll just connect it between this and ground, and that'll connect up. But I wanted to make sure that I had the connection, still a good connection here, so I went ahead and just soldered the wire back to the red wire here, so that those two are connected, and then I'll just put the resistor on the outside. But in the process of doing all this, I ended up completely unpotting the transformers, and which was a lot of fun. Even though the potting material is not real hard, it's kind of basically the same stuff. But I tore them apart, and I was able to loosen up the top transformer, which is the second one on the schematic. But I couldn't get the bottom one out. I started thinking, well, maybe they being a pain in my butt, put the capacitor and resistor in the bottom. So I took my Dremel and cut out this bottom a little bit, because it won't be seen. This will be sitting down the chassis like this. There's just a small hole where these wires go through on the chassis, so you really won't see this. Cut this out and was able to push out the rest of it through the top without any problems. And then when I put it all back together, it's got a lot of cardboard, and of course I have to replace the wires, and hot glue to hold it together, keep it from vibrating or shaking around. Now the last little thing I want to touch on is I have decided to paint the chassis, and the primary reason or one of the main reasons is, if I had a cabinet and stuff, and I'll keep my eyes out every once in a while. I've got a few sites that I can find actually just cabinets on once in a while, and so if I find a cabinet, then I'll put the radio in it. That don't have a radio or anything, just the cabinet alone. I've already put a feeler out in a couple spots, but otherwise this radio is going to set out and be operational outward, so I want the chassis to look as good as it can. Well, after cleaning the chassis, not only did I have my rust up here that just is not really wanting to clean up in this spot, but there's very fine rust spots all over this thing. So even if I was to try to shine it up and do something with these other two spots, they'd still be real noticeable. So I'm going to paint the top side. I have to sand this. It's nickel plated, so I have to scratch her up good and get it where I can paint it. And I want to find something that is very close to just this dull coated finish. I mean, this stuff probably would shine up, being it's nickel, and be nice and shiny, but it really don't have to be exactly that way. The sides will never shine up, even if I was to. Everything is not because of that, because their nickel plating wasn't as good on the sides. So of course I drilled everything out and removed everything, and the shields, I've run across these before, so if you ever do, they're easy to remove. They're crimped in. Basically they set up through the chassis, and there's still just enough material to bend over. All you got to do is take you something like a chisel, a dull chisel, not so much a metal chisel. I used an old wood chisel that's not in the best of condition, and gently get underneath them and tap them loose. The wood chisel is soft enough material, and it's dull enough that it wouldn't really bother these too much, and until I get them open up just enough that it would fall out. They'll have to be re-straightened. That's easy. This is real soft material, and it's easy to bend. And I'll stick it back in, and when I'm ready. Now what I'm going to do is, when I actually paint the chassis. I'm going to use this as a template, and even though these are bent over on the other side, I am still going to keep paint from getting to this area here on the chassis. So I'll use this as a template to for the tape I put on there, masking tape or whatever I use to keep the paint from adhering. I could put grease on there if I want. So that's one thing you can do. If you got something that is like extraordinarily difficult to get your tape really good to keep paint from getting on there, you can put a little bit of grease on there. Don't not pile it up, but just a very light little grease or petroleum jelly, even anything like that, right at that surface there where you don't want paint to stick, and it won't stick. It'll stick to that, but it will not. And when your paint's completely dry, don't wipe it off while the paint is just still curing. You want to let it really, truly, completely dry. However long the can says, you know, some paints is 24 hours, some longer, some shorter. Then you wipe it off, and it won't have no paint there. Oh, standard tube sockets. They got a nice little arrow on the 6 pins, so you don't have to try to look for the wider pins or the filament pins. Just an arrow shows you where those are. Kind of nice. I see. I think that's about it. Only other things I've been doing. I've got a few more things to work on. And of course the chassis. While the chassis is going through its process of being, you know, primed, sanded, primed, painted, and everything, I'll have time to be working on the other project and wire recorder, and I can make some videos on that. Straightened up some of these cans. This is the one that had the that nut underneath and had shoved it down. I still got a little more. This is just real quick, just shoving it back in place, although it sits down like this. Other than this little here, nothing else is going to be shown. This will not come out. You can get it out a little bit if you could even get to it, but when you got an indentation that much, it has actually stretched the metal, so you can't re-shrink the metal. So, but that's, you know, it's sitting down on the chassis, so it's not almost, it's almost something you won't see. Well, I think that's about all. The video's plenty long enough. So anyway, I'm gonna get off of here, and like I said, I'll get back to the wire recorder in a few days, a couple days, and get a video up of it where I'm at on it. It's coming together just fine, and so those has been kind of interesting. That I am still working on that, and so I will get another video up of it. So I just wanted to show you some of the stuff where I was at here and everything. So I'll get off here now and say thank you for watching, and those who are new subscribers, thank you for subscribing, and so I'll see you guys in the next video, and you all have a good day.